right? So how important is it to talk to customers to kind of get insight about what they want out of a product versus like, kind of giving them things they may not know they even want yet?
Yeah. So I think this really depends on the phase of product development that you're currently in. When we were first conceiving the idea of Welcome, right, we didn't have a product yet. So what we did was, because our CEO is a really great designer, we took all of the input from the customers that we were talking to, and we created this really high fidelity prototype in a design tool called Figma. And we literally showed it to them. We said, look, this is what we're thinking about building. What do you think? Right? So we literally showed, to use your analogy, we showed them that car, and they were able to give us feedback on that. Now that we have a product and it's in the market, we can't all of a sudden say, hey, what do you want? We'll create a completely new product for you, right? It doesn't really work that way. So it's a lot more iterative at our stage. But that 0 to 1 stage, as you described it, is the funnest for me because it's a blue ocean, right? Literally, the product could be anything. And the real skill, I think, in being an entrepreneur is to do exactly what you mentioned, is to take the customer pain points and create a solution around that that's not necessarily based on something that other people are doing, but based on your creativity, right? And that's exactly what we did. We heard our customers wanted better production value. They wanted more engagement. And we're like, I wonder what it would be like if virtual events felt like TV shows, right?
I
And,
love
and
that.
at that point, like nobody really created something like that. So we were able to start from scratch and create a product that, to this day, and nobody else has managed to duplicate.
Yeah, that's awesome. What do you think the difference is between a company that goes on to become like a big public company like that, or something that might get acquired like earlier on? Did you ever like think back about watching DraftKings kind of turn into what it became and think what the difference was?
That's a really good question. I mean, a lot of it, I think, is out of your control as an entrepreneur, right? Like a lot of things have to go right, especially with something like DraftKings, FanDuel. Um, the biggest risk there was legal, right? And like nobody knew whether or not they would get legalized. And now certainly all the laws have gone in their favor, especially with all the sports gambling laws and things like that. So at the end of the day, when I think about the difference between what I did and what they just took a much bigger risk than
Right.
I did,
Yeah.
right? I made a mobile app for fantasy sports. It was a pretty obvious idea, at least to me at the time, right? But I always knew the upside wasn't going to be quite as high. But that was okay. I mean, that was my first experience starting a company. Learned a lot, but this time around, I'm really swinging for the fences.
What is like in a very microscopic way, right? And I know it's probably different for each product, but like what is traction? Like what specific things are investors looking for that like a beginning entrepreneur might be able to try to optimize for?
Yeah, I mean, so it really depends on the type of business that you're running, right? If you're a B2C startup, they're probably looking for user growth. All right. So one of the things that they teach you when you go into Y Combinator, which is accelerator that we did, was you want to make sure that you set your metric and that you figure out ways to grow it consistently week over week, right? And so if you can grow at 10% per week, you can start off with a very small user base, but showing that traction and that growth is going to be what allows investors to sort of see this becoming a really, really big idea. Because at the end of the day, the biggest difference between a startup and just a small business is your growth rate. That's it, right? If you're fast growing, you're a startup, you're investable. If you're growing at sort of a linear pace, you're really not. So users, that's a big one for B2B startups like ours. Revenue, right? Whether it's annual recurring revenue or the amount of contracts that you have. If you're not making revenue, then maybe the amount of pilots that you have. Something to show that there's a demand for your product. Obviously, the best is revenue. For us, we're pretty audacious because we charge a lot of money up front, right? And one of the reasons we're able to do that, I think, is because nobody really knew what a good virtual event experience was. And because it's a new market, we're able to say, look, this is our idea of a great virtual event. We think they should look less like Zoom meetings and more like a heavily produced television show. And we'll give you the tools to be able to do that. So it looks like your virtual events on CNN, right? And that really struck a chord with the businesses that we were talking to, and they were willing to pay a lot of money for our product right out the gate.